All right, all right, all right. All right, let's just appreciate again Minister Ryan, everybody. So grateful that Minister Ryan is here hanging out with us. Obviously, we just got a chance to experience your powerful ministry of preaching and teaching. And I don't know if there's anything you want to just add to background, or maybe just give folks a sense of your own journey and what you want us to know before we jump into our talk about what's coming up.
Yes. I got to start calling him Professor now because he gave me an assignment. We were on the phone the other day, and he's like, can you make some slides? And I said, all right. So next slide. Please. So how did we get here? This is Pastor Mike and I in 2018, that summer, at a Live Free conference where many people in congregations and organizations addressing the epidemic of gun violence in this country gathered together in LA. And so I did come here at the top of 2017 upon the invitation of a friend who's here. I won't point them out, but they're here. Praise God for them.
Sitting on the front row with a camera out. Sorry about that. Naima Jordan, everybody. Everybody come here for that.
Pastor Mike that was a beautiful introduction. It was so eloquent, so on point. And the word that I'm going to name that Pastor Mike sort of held off and allowing me to name it for myself was, I came here in August of 2016 for a master's in journalism program. And I feel like I moved here on a Wednesday, and by Friday I had figured out that I was pregnant. And by the following Wednesday, made the decision to have an abortion. And I was really looking for the hidden cameras in Planned Parenthood, because the woman was like, well, do you have any questions? And I said, no. I was like, well, how far along do you have to know the gender? She's like, about 17 weeks. And I was just 7 weeks along. And so she's like, well, I don't know if I'm supposed to tell you this, but it's twins. And I said, excuse me? And so that was such a shock, one, being pregnant and not intending to be so at that point in my life. I was 25, and then learning that it was twins. And so that put me in a really dark place, because I think that motherhood is one of the most beautiful things about being a woman in this world. And so to have that shock happen was really rough. So I had an abortion on my third day of grad school, August 31st, 2016. And I really do thank God for Naima, because prior to that, I was doing my work with Gloucester Act, creating these shirts that were memorializing Black folks that had been killed by police. And that also was really heavy work, and I wasn't really coming up for air. At the time, I didn't quite realize that, but that was the case. And so I was just carrying with myself a lot of weight. So by the time I got here, I was really exhausted. But Naima was the one who said, apply to grad school, apply to Berkeley. I ignored her for a year. And she's like, they'll fly you out, come check it out. I was like, all right, I'll get flued out, I'll come. But Naima and I go back to undergrad in a way, because we both went to Northwestern, studied journalism there for undergrad. We pledged Delta, and we met through Northwestern and Delta. And so she really kept me afloat, drove me to and from Planned Parenthood that day, and just has been, besides being like the unofficial mayor of Oakland, has been a source of light in my life during a really dark time. And so she said, do you want to come to church? And so I said, all right. So when I got back, January 2017, I started coming to the Way, and that's how we got here.
Come on, clap it up for that wonderful Christian community. And just, yes, and it is, I think, important to say that, your journey, certainly here at the Way, just from my own recollection, was filled with lots of questions and inquiry and doubt. I mean, a lot of us, almost 7, 8 years, 10 years later, after, the kind of rise of Black Lives Matter, we don't fully appreciate how hard it was in the earliest years just to make sense of everything, and, lots of questions of theodicy. Why do bad things happen to good people? Questions we ask while we're in seminary. And so, can you just maybe talk a little bit about that journey of just wrestling with God? We heard it in your sermon a lot, right? Like you're certainly not afraid to name this idea of lament, of questions of God, what's up, and not just trying to literally gloss over that. Maybe just say a word about that kind of part of your faith journey.
Yeah, I really thank God for this church and for Pastor Mike. There was one time he was like, "Yeah, we were in church," and he was like, "Ryan's always sitting in the back row," and I was like, "How dare he expose me?" Because I grew up in church, but I was never like a back row type of person until I got here, and like the darkness was all around me. But I would sit in the back, didn't talk to nobody. If Naima was here, I'd be like, I was sitting in the fourth row only because she were here. But it was a really tough time. I thank God for the healthcare that they do have at Berkeley, because I got synced up with a really incredible therapist, and about a month after my abortion, I just kind of hit a wall. I wasn't sleeping very much. I was really anxious. I was like pretending like Snickers were breakfast. Like I just was really having a hard time. I thought about dropping out, if I'm being honest. Like I just felt so devastated by such an unexpected loss. But all the while, God was like, I'm here with you. The question is not, am I going to forgive you? The question is, can you forgive yourself? And so I was carrying that question with me because the pregnancy was really a series of like over a decade of unloving choices, right? Unhealthy relationships that wound me up with this person and with our children, if you will. But also I was carrying weight, really a lot of secondhand trauma, because through my work with Gloucester, it was an honor to meet Oscar Grant Jr., but through that work I had met, so I'm from DC, so I was at Freddie Gray's funeral, so I met his twin sister, Frederica. I met his parents. I met, that funeral was wild because I met Amadou's mother in the parking lot. I had been used to sort of seeing Sabrina Fulton, who's Trayvon's mom, and Leslie McFadden, who's Mike's mother. So I was meeting moms throughout the movement. I met Sandra Bland's mother and her sisters in Baltimore at an event. So I'm meeting all these families, and I'm wearing their names on my chest all the time. I was having nightmares. It was just a really heavy work. So there was one time, it was 2017, and I got to the Art Institute of San Francisco for an event, and Sadie Barnett, she's an incredible artist, look her up, but she has done some work around it. Her father was a Panther, and she has taken some of the files that the FBI has on him and made art out of them with like bright pink spray paint and bedazzled them and things like that. And so I was at an event, and then I go outside to their kind of like patio deck thing, and I heard this voice. I was just like, jump. And I'm like, And it had gotten to the point where I had taken my shoes off, and I was ready to jump because I was like, there was just so much weight and despair around me, more than I knew that I was carrying. And it wasn't just my own. And so I called a couple friends. I called Naima. She came and got me, or my friend from college came and got me, took me to her house. I was there for the next 2 days, so I wasn't alone. But the next morning, a phone call came in, and it was Essence Magazine. And they wanted me to, I'd be forgetting, I was like, I got a picture of that too, but I forgot. If you Google like Essence Magazine 2018 Woke Women, they had a cover where they were doing their Woke 100 issue, so it had a lot of the mothers on the cover, different folks doing the work. And so that opportunity came just after this big wrestling, this big battle for my life, quite literally. So it was a dark time here, but I think, and there was one time I was going through it, and Pastor Mike said, come, you need to make an announcement about the Out of Darkness Walk for Suicide Prevention, which some of the folks from the Way came, and we walked the loop.
It was at Lake Merritt.
Ms. Moni was there. Yeah. We walked the loop of Lake Merritt, and that was really powerful, too, because there was a mother who came, and she said her son, he was like 8. She's like, he told me before, Mommy, I don't want to be here. And so these things are happening in our community, but it was a journey. So long story short, I think, can we go to the next slide? I forgot what's next. Let's see. Okay, Oh man, I got to give a shout out to my dogs, my family. While I was here, I had the honor of teaching journalism at San Quentin State Prison. Most of my guys have gotten out, thank God. And I have to thank God for former Governor Jerry Brown because he commuted a lot of sentences. So my students were in between 37 and 61. So Lawrence in the back was the youngest, the tallest and the youngest. That right there is Angela Davis's cousin, his son unfortunately was killed in LA while he was incarcerated. So these brothers really kept me afloat during this dark time. I was teaching there every Friday and Sunday, and I could just be like, whatever about my schoolwork, but I got to make sure my syllabus, my lesson plan is right, because they might not see outside of these gates. So they really kept me afloat during that time, and I thank God for that. And I was actually, after I wore that shirt, the prison ended up banning movement shirts or shirts with the message. And I was like, it would be the one day that I wore this shirt that y'all want to take a picture. So that happened. But they kept me afloat. And so, God can really they helped me, right? They really helped me stay afloat. So we can go to the next slide. Well, we'll see what's next. Oh, thank you. All right. So I graduated in 2018, and then I moved. That was also really a traumatic exit, because that summer I was on the train the same day that Nia Wilson was killed. So if y'all remember, a white supremacist killed her in a very graphic way. And I was on the train that day, and my friend called and said, "Do you want me to pick you up from West Oakland instead of MacArthur?" And so I said yes. And so I flew out the next day to DC. I was home for 6 weeks, and then I got a job working as an NPR, correspondent at an NPR member station in Hartford, Connecticut. And so that was a really interesting time. I was hurting, but you just throw yourself into your work, and so to kind of numb the pain and just put it on the shelf. But I did, found another therapist, was walking out a lot of these old wounds. I had lost my grandma a semester before I graduated here from Berkeley, and so that was really fresh for me as well. So it was just a lot of pain, childhood wounds coming up. So I was reporting while hurting, and then also hurting because to be Black in any industry is really challenging, but to be Black in an industry where they kind of pat themselves on the back for the First Amendment is also really wild. But then being told to be silent and be quiet. So I couldn't go to a protest unless I was working. And that was really hard because I needed space for my own anger. And this day I really was afraid to get on, the protesters had gotten on the highway to shut it down. And I was afraid because I was like, am I gonna lose my job? We had a fatal police shooting of a 18-year-old Puerto Rican young man, and Anthony Jose Vega Cruz. Chulo was his nickname. And my job tried to suspend me for that, for my reporting and just speaking about police accountability and transparency. So that was really hard to have to defend myself. But it was during that time, in that really when it says crushed on every side, right? That scripture really felt like my life. I was crying every morning before work. I felt incredibly uncomfortable. And so I had a year left on my contract. And so God was like, listen, we're gonna apply to Yale. I was like, what? I was like, wait, I just finished school. I'm trying to keep my job. And he's like, we're gonna apply to Yale. So I had gone to Philly for a gun violence conference. And then the day after, I went to Yale for this open house for Yale Divinity School. So then, next slide. So it was right at the end of the pandemic. I had a good time. It says from reporter to minister, but we thank God for joy because I did have a good time at times, not all the time, but at times. When as a reporter, learned a lot. I honestly think reporting helped me to become a better listener, which is crucial as a pastor. And learning how that my opinion is not always the most important thing, right? Because when I was covering guns, that was my beat. That's the journalism word. My subject was guns. And so when you're talking, I remember one of my first assignments, it was a gun buyback program. And there was a police officer, he was like, yeah, it just became so hard to be a cop after Ferguson. And I was like, tell me more. What do you mean by that? But realizing in the moment that like how I thought was not my job to insert how I felt as a reporter, as someone who was non-biased. So I learned a lot about listening during that time. And then, I graduated in May with my Master's of Divinity, and I thank God for that. Next slide. And I have done a lot of healing in the process. If you can't tell, we thank God. So I just came from Philly. And my research now, so this is a poster that I was presenting about the preliminary results of my research. So I did a lot of deep listening with women who self-identify as Christian, who've had abortions. And so what I'm in the process of doing is making the case for pastoral care for women who've had abortion. So my goal is to make a pastoral care guide and a spiritual care guide for us. And I was just pointing out a lot of the things that are happening. You can't see in the poster, but essentially 1 in 4 women have had abortion. So you could very well be, I count as the 1 in 4 in this room, put it that way. And after Roe v. Wade was eradicated, it was 17 million women who lost the ability to even just choose to have an abortion in their home state. And so that's really dire for our communities because we know that it's Black Maternal Health Week. But the Black maternal mortality rates for Black women are incredibly high. Right. And so what that means is as abortion access declines, the maternal mortality rates will increase, which is really that's what do you call it? That's a public health emergency. And so our churches need to know what it means, what their state's laws are. Like one of my line sisters called me and said she works in local news in Tennessee, and she said, I have a coworker, she's on air, she's an anchor, she's pregnant, and she's gonna have to drive 5 hours to East St. Louis to have her abortion. And she had also been misinformed about, having the surgical procedure does not actually decrease your chances of fertility in the future. So she had been misinformed about that and was considering the pill, but the thing about the pill is that it's a lengthier kind of process because you're essentially like miscarrying at home. But when you're on the road and you're bleeding heavily, that's not a good idea. And so there's a lot of misinformation out there that's creating a lot of safety issues. And then I speak about the theological piece, which is to say that there's nothing in the Bible that is anti-abortion, that has been an argument that has been set up particularly in the 80s around homosexuality, the moral majority, that sort of those parachurch organizations that have been funded by political organizations have really set this up as something that is a moral sin or a moral misjudgment when the Bible doesn't really talk about that. And then also what it doesn't address that is just the patriarchy and misogyny that a lot of people have read into biblical narratives, right? And that have read into Christianity as the norm, when in reality that's not the case. Like we have bodily autonomy in the Bible. And so I talk about that, and then I also mentioned that, women, we want to be heard. We want safe spaces to listen, to share our stories. The women that I spoke to initially were in their 30s, 60s, and 70s, and all had abortions and felt like either the church's silence told them everything they needed to know, that they couldn't talk about their grief from having an abortion at church, or that what the church had said told them everything they needed to know, and therefore they couldn't talk about it at church. And so there's really a deep need for churches to understand that this grief matters, right? Like this is a grieving event. Not all women consider their abortions traumatic, so reproductive loss can kind of be put in 3 buckets, which is grief, trauma, and moral injury. And so depending on your experience, you might check all 3 boxes, you might check 2, you might just check grief, right? Because it's a loss. Either way you look at it, it is a form of reproductive loss. But helping to move through those nuances, to bring that language to churches, and also the reality of it, and this is something that I feel strongly about, is that we're missing the mark when we fixate theologically on is this right or wrong. Because one, the woman who says, there are going to be women who say, I will always view abortion as a sin, and I can seek forgiveness for God from that. There's going to be women like myself who don't believe it to be a sin, and I have peace about that. And there are going to be women who oscillate throughout their lifetime. That is the reality. But in the midst of that reality, we have to provide care. We have to provide care. If women can bring other issues, that they have to the church, then why can't they bring that grief to the church? Why doesn't Grief Share have a module on this type of reproductive loss? Why aren't we having these conversations when we are here? We are here. And this is something that women will continue to choose for themselves, because some of the statistics, most women who have abortions these are all ors, not and, have some level of education, might be low income, might already have children, might be in their 20s, which I was, right? So there's a lot of statistics that we don't even know because the political narratives gloss over the nuances. But I firmly believe, and I thank God that this is a part of my testimony that I can share, and now that I'm healed enough to be doing this work, it's really a joy. And I thank God. I thank God for Pastor Mike, because I felt safe to tell him when I was ready. I felt safe to tell him that is what happened to me, or not what happened to me, but I chose abortion. I felt safe, and I think that's rare. But even when you had never said anything about it, but the fact that there was just something about you, right? That softness, that trustworthiness, that I felt like I could come to you and share, that made my journey through here a lot easier. So I do, let's please give God praise for Pastor Mike.
Well, I think, yes, and I totally agree that there is an important pastoral care issue as relates to the conversations around bodily autonomy and reproductive health, abortions, et cetera. I think that it's important to continue to think about how we, and I think it is appropriate, as a theologian, a pastor, et cetera, all theology is contextual, meaning that, it is important to keep thinking about how do we apply Scripture in ways that are faithful and that are consistent. I do think that
you can go to the next slide too.
I would argue that while the Scriptures don't necessarily speak to abortion in our current context, I certainly think that there are texts where we should appreciate the way life is supposed to be respected and honored and protected. I think in the church, though, one of our great challenges is that there's such an inconsistency in the application of that value, right? And right now across the country, where abortion has become so politicized, not centering, I would say, the life of the mother or those unborn in the womb of the mother, that now you have access to this kind of care, not dependent on the person, but dependent on what state you live in. And that, to me, has become the most dangerous part of this conversation. The thing that really moved me to a place of trying to be a ally on steroids, if you will, is I talked to a old school holiness Pentecostal evangelist who she's in her 70s, and she said she remembered what it was like pre-Roe versus Wade. And she said she remembered what it felt like for the young women in her family and in her church who were needing to engage with, the termination of their pregnancy for whatever reason, and how it put their lives in danger. And she told me, she's like, young man, it's not your place to give a woman a quiz about why she's choosing to make this decision. It is your responsibility to make sure that she's safe and that whatever decision she makes, she can outlive that decision and be a part of a community that will love and care for her. And so my hope is that, I'm sure there are folks who are watching or listening or maybe in here who would think, disagree that there are scriptures that speak about abortion, and some folks are willing to die on that hill. I'm not willing to die on a lot of hills related to scriptural interpretation because I know that there's a lot of folk who pick and choose what scriptures you're willing to die on the hill about. And if all of us gonna die on the hill of a scriptural interpretation, we all be dead on the hill. Somebody say amen. But I do believe that what we are always called to do is have Christian community where people can find themselves a place to belong. got it on our shirt, right? And whether we agree with folks' decisions, whether we agree with folks' positionality in life, every trauma requires healing. And healing happens, I believe, in the context of community. And I pray that Christian community can be the best place and space to heal. I'm super excited about this project with Minister Ryan, because I do believe that we need more pastoral care resources for folks who are going into seminaries or into full-time ministry that emerge out of the experience of those who need pastoral care. That makes sense? So again, when I was at the Assemblies of God Bible College, which is a right-wing Bible college, I never forget our ethics class. We had a Christian ethics class, and it was taught by this really short white guy named Bill Self, or somebody who was into himself, right? But I remember it was a semester-long course. That meant it was probably 12 weeks. And I would say 9 of the 12 weeks were all about, like, how do you respond to discrimination in the workplace? How do you respond to homosexuality? How do you respond to, abortions? How do you respond to sexual abuse in the church? And there's all these topics, and he's, like, not directly impacted by any of them. And he's teaching a whole semester-long course on how to respond, how to provide pastoral care to people, and you're not impacted by any of it. Back then, I really started to realize we need more resources. And so can you talk a little bit about this project as a resource-creating effort so we can understand how folks in this congregation and beyond can kind of tap in and be a part of it? Because I do think it will be a valuable resource. Obviously, Minister Ryan is quite the entrepreneurial force of nature, so I have no doubt that whatever is created is not going to stay on somebody's bookshelf. I'm sure it's going to go far and wide. So talk a little bit about this project and what you hope it does, and then maybe just say a quick word about how we plan to roll it out here at the Way.
Yeah, absolutely. So this quote, which I'm sure you all have had time to read, comes from a book. I want to say it came out in 2019, I think. It's called Spiritual Care in the Age of Black Lives Matter. It was edited by Reverend Dr. Danielle Bahuru. So thankfully, this was on our syllabus for my Intro to Pastoral Care class. So I was introduced to this book in 2020, and they had just one chapter, chapter 16. It was called Changing the Subject, and it maybe was like a 12-page long chapter, and it was talking about abortion. And so this quote from Reverend Dr. Karen Walker McClure has always stuck with me, has really been also like an anchor for the work, and it really turned the light bulb on that there is much more to be done in the area of pastoral care, in particular for women who've chosen or who have had abortions, because now I personally don't believe all women have chosen freely. Like, there's also coercion and a lot of things to talk about, but I just want to be careful about naming that as well. And so if you go to the next slide, so yes, it says, "It is not God's intention that women should suffer because of their choices. God is a God of liberation, healing, and grace, not one who would desire that women live their lives in secrecy, shame, and guilt without the forgiveness of others or oneself." And so that's Reverend Dr. Karen Walker McClure. So if we can go to the next slide. So essentially what it looks like is there's a little, it's fine. The next one is good. There's a little email icon, but Lord knows with technology. Anyways, so what it's going to look like is that I'll be back here in the summer for about 4 weeks. And if you choose to participate in the research, essentially you're committing to 3 one-hour interviews where we will journey through your abortion experience, right? We'll just talk through it. What was it like? Where were you? How old were you? A lot of details and just recalling of your experience. You'll also be given a participant journal. So if there are any memories or thoughts that come up in between sessions, so it's 3 weeks back to back. So say I'm meeting with Susie every Tuesday at noon for 3 weeks in a row, right? She'll have that journal. So in between sessions, if a memory resurfaces, which that can happen, she'll be able to write those down. And then at the end of that, participants will be asked to write the story of their abortion, right? To make meaning of what happened. And I think I asked for around 3 to 5 paragraphs. You're not writing a novel. You're not writing, a 10-page paper. It's just kind of like, can I hear in your own words, now that we've dipped back into, the well of your memory, how you make sense of your experience. And then what's optional after that is a small group sharing circle in which participants will come together, share their narratives with each other, and then we'll have a continued conversation to think together about what type of resources are helpful for you in the wake of your abortion, right? For me, it's been, this is year 7. For some women, it's been 30 years, 20 years, right? 5 years, weeks even. And so thinking together with each other about what type of spiritual care resources would you like to help you continue, because grief is ongoing, right? Grief doesn't really go away. And that's okay. I don't believe grief is punishment. Grief is just a reality of the human condition. And so we'll think together about those resources. If you happen to not be available for in person in summer, please reach out to me. I'll be starting round 2, and that will be on Zoom, again, those 3 weeks in a row, so that we're not kind of having gaps between our conversations. But feel free to reach out to me about that, and that's pretty much it. So I'm delighted to be back to be able to spend some time in the summer here for about 4 weeks. I'm so grateful that the Way is willing to host me. We need churches that are willing to say yes. Again, you're not saying yes to my theology. You're not saying yes to abortion. You're just saying yes, that we need care, that women who have made this choice deserve care, that women that have had this experience deserve care, and deserve safe spaces to be able to talk about part of their life experience, just one decision that's been made in the course of their lifetime. So can we just clap it up for the Way and Pastor Mike I'm grateful for his yes. I'm grateful for his yes.
Well, it's not hard to say yes, and I've had well over a dozen or so women in my life or in my ministry through the years, since my days as a youth pastor, who have disclosed that they've decided to terminate their pregnancy for many different reasons, and I've known that that's a trust that they share with me, right? But I also know that a lot of our churches just don't have the resources to handle this well. And I just want us to, if we can help create resources that can handle this well, then I feel like that's what we're here for. So I would love to just create, for the last maybe 10 minutes or so, any questions about the process, more questions about like the process. I don't want necessarily us to start trying to interrogate Minister Ryan's story. But I would love to hear, again, I do think if this experience resonates with you, or if you have someone in your family or friends, and you want to kind of prep and sit with them and do this as a collective, it would be powerful. We are recording this, so this will be available to kind of share with folks if they want to get a chance to meet Minister Ryan virtually, through her story. Then and they're not here in the building today. But again, I think this is a very, very valuable resource. So any questions for Minister Ryan or something?
And I should also say, so each participant goes through an intake, so they're explained in full what the project is, how it operates, and then they're also given a safety plan. And so the safety plan or the safety inventory essentially assess, like, are you currently seeing a therapist? Are you living with people who are aware of your abortion experience? If not, who are safe people that you could call? Are there people or a person that you could let know that you're going through this process? And so, the safety inventory was adapted from a resource from the Suicide Prevention Organization. And so that is also given to each woman. And I really only kind of look at the first or second page just to kind of have an idea of the climate that you're in. So that is also a resource that's available. And then also in terms of the interviews, you can always ask for a break in the midst of the conversation. You can say if an hour is feeling like too long for you in that particular day, you can say, hey, can we cut it at 30 minutes? This has been enough for today, and that's okay. And then we'll start again, pick up where we left off the following week. And so I'm not necessarily beholden to those full 60 minutes. I found with one of the women who did not desire to be a mother at all, that those 3 hours maybe felt a little too long, right? It was, by the time we got to the third week, we didn't necessarily use that full hour, and that's okay. So there's a lot of flexibility, but the model is just set up so that there's enough time, but prayerfully not too much time, just to cover all the bases. But I'm very thorough in making sure that even in the experience that you're feeling held, that you're feeling safe. But I certainly welcome any questions.
And can this process be done virtually, or so even if there are folks who may not be here physically in Berkeley, because we, of course, have a virtual membership as well, so folks can tap into this virtually as well. Absolutely. Yeah. And how many people do you hope to interview to help the study be informed? And are we the only congregation that said yes? Hopefully not.
No. So I served in a United Church of Christ congregation outside of New Haven, Connecticut for 5 months while their pastor was on sabbatical. So my first 3 women were from that church. There's a couple other churches that I've worked with in New Haven that I'm seeking to reach out with. And then this round 2 is really me reaching out to kind of like friends and family, if you will, to do those virtual conversations. But then I'd probably say I can be interviewing through October. So my plan is to also reach out to other congregations in hopes. It's not easy because it's just a lot of discomfort around it. But my hope is to be able to draw from some other congregations in addition to just putting the word out on social media, coming here. So through October, and then I got to get to writing. So
yes. When do you think this will be completed and done? And Pastor Nisha, can you just collect the ones where anyone has questions? Just one? Okay.
Sister Teresa has one that she wants to speak out.
You want to? Okay. Okay. It's not legible. Okay.
Sister Teresa.
Hi there. I know that you're conducting the study, but just in terms of like what we can do right now as a church. One was what educational resources available to just demystify, right, abortion and the stigma attached to it, because first you got to change the mindsets of people, and we just ain't there yet, right? Or people aren't honest about how they really feel or the questions that they have. And then the second one is, how do you support small churches, especially when everybody knows each other and folks, especially young people, already have a hard time coming to people because they're afraid that if they ask for prayer or if they ask for support, everybody's going to know. So what are ways to identify those folks and make them safe and finding those right resources?
Like Oprah. So one resource is just the Center for Reproductive Rights. If you Google them, they have a map that has all the laws, but then they also have a lot of information and studies. But I'll also put together a resource list of different reproductive justice organizations that have resources available. There's also Sacred, which is I forget the full acronym, but it's a spiritual alliance for reproductive dignity. And so I'll be going to their conference in May in New Orleans, but they're a really wonderful interfaith organization that has resources available. So those are a couple: Center for Reproductive Rights and then Sacred for Reproductive Dignity. But I'll also share a list that you can share with the congregation. And in terms of helping young folks feel safe, or just folks in a small congregation, what I would really and truly honestly say is that it matters to have someone to talk about it, right? I have spoken about abortion in the pulpit, and I've also found that 9 times out of 10, like when I self-disclose, if I'm just in conversation with a woman, maybe I'm at a bar or at brunch or this place or anywhere really, and I say it, 9 times out of 10, a woman will self-disclose. And so it matters to know, for someone to be able to say that they have had it. And it does take courage. I'm not at all disregarding that. But once you are in a space where you're like, hey, this is no longer cloaked in shame, right? Or this is no longer carrying such a heavy stigma, right? That then it signals to folks in the pews in the congregation that, hey, this is okay to talk about, right? Because someone else that I respect, that I see in leadership, or that I see, serving, has talked about it. And so I think really naming it is really significant in that journey of healing and that journey of opening up space and community and safety. I think naming is one of the first steps. And that took time for me because I used to use different language, euphemisms, termination, and things like that. It took me maybe a year or so to say abortion without like having any kind of reaction or stuttering or anything. So it does take time, but I do think naming it is really significant in that journey for congregations and communities.
All right, I have a question, and then Pastor Nisha has one. Can participants be anonymous, and will we provide security on site for anti-abortion fanatics? So you can talk about the participants, and then I'll talk about security.
The answer is yes. So what happens is that each woman is asked to choose their own pseudonym. So that means that if I'm referencing any part of your story, then you're choosing a name for yourself. So if it were to show up as like a short kind of case study in the pastoral care guide, that it would say, Susie was 25 when she moved out to California to start a graduate program and discovered that she was pregnant. And so you essentially know who you are in the narrative because you've chosen that name for yourself. But at no point in time will you be identifiable any sort of identifying information beyond sort of like minor details, if you will, kind of your age and maybe where you were. At the very least, like the state, not so much the city. But just so people can understand, the landscape of abortion access looks different based on where you live, based on what year it was, and based on even like in the context of what year it was, who was in the White House, right? The different administrations. So those smaller details will be included, but it will remain anonymous, and you'll always be referenced by your pseudonym. If there's a person who feels exceptionally uncomfortable and doesn't want their narrative to be included, then we can absolutely honor that, and I'll just more so use it to inform my research. But the short answer is yes, you can remain anonymous.
And I'll just clarify that I will not be involved in this in any way. So, like, I won't even know if anyone participates or if they do or if they don't. All of your communication should be directly to Salt and Light Ministries at DC@gmail, and it goes directly to Minister Ryan. So, and when we say we're hosting it, it's not that we're actually going to like have a meeting here at the Way, unless Minister Ryan wants us to. But my imagination is that these will be very personal, kind of private engagements that you will schedule with Minister Ryan on a one-to-one basis. We're hosting it just means that we are helping to amplify it and provide, a congregational, spiritual, pastoral covering for it. We're affirming that this is an important conversation, it's an important resource, and it's important opportunities for further healing and destigmatizing, right? So that's when we agreed to host it. That's what we agreed. It's not for Pastor Mike. I'm not gonna I don't want to see a list. I'm not gonna see a list. I'm not gonna be there co-interviewing with Mr. Ryan. Like, so tell me what happened here. And it's not that kind of thing at all. So I just want to be able to say that as well.
And I'll say with my initial round of participants, the interviews occurred at their houses, except for one who happened to be a friend. And so we did a sort of like a neutral space on campus. And then one of the days we actually did it at my apartment, just because we were kind of short on time. And so, but that was only because she was my friend, but generally I was trying to, and then actually, hers was like a hybrid. One was on Zoom because she had a cold. One was at my apartment because we were short on time, and the other time was a neutral space on campus. So if you need a neutral space, the Way could serve as that neutral space. just because I don't have kind of a campus resource to access while I'm out here. But I'm more than welcome to come to your home, or if there's a location of your choosing that you feel safe in, I'm more than welcome to come to you. And then if folks do decide that they want to participate in the sharing circle, which again is optional, then this could also serve as a neutral space for that to take place. But there will be an additional waiver for consent and anonymity, so that if you do come here to participate in the sharing circle, you're not revealing any of the other participants that are here. And I'm very firm about that, because we want to respect everybody's privacy. So thank you, whoever raised that question, because those are some points I forgot to mention.
All right, Pastor T.
Welcome. Thank you so much, Minister Ryan. And I'm wondering, I don't want to add to your workload. I know you already got so much going on with your research and study, but imagining if there could be a workshop or something for all of us who hold people who have gone through this experience, or when people confide in us, how do we walk, how do we be present with them, or even for partners or menfolk who need to be maybe more versed on this area. Could you possibly create something for us to hold as a congregation, so that we can have a place of belonging?
Yeah, absolutely. I've done versions of that work with a couple congregations, and so I'm happy to, as I'm continuing to learn more and read more. Thank God it's April. We got till June or July, so I'll put that together and would love to put that workshop on. So thank you for that.
All right, have we firmed up exactly when you're coming yet? No, not yet. All right. So I believe that a lot of this kind of firming up will be dependent on our responses to, saying we know folks or we want to participate, but we do plan to do it during the kind of summer months. Remember, July is our annual anniversary month, so we have all kind of folks coming in. Reverend Rahel's coming, Pastor Tracy's coming, so we can just add you to the whole docket, if you will, and maybe have a special, training or something during that time. But nevertheless, I hope that this has been informative. I hope it feels relevant. It is relevant with the rise of these new laws related to abortion, reproductive health, and that is very state to state based. It may not necessarily impact many of us who are live in California per se, but in lots of places where we do work across the country, people are even being threatened with arrest if they drive someone or doctors perform. So this is something that we want to certainly be mindful of, and all of this helps us hopefully to create a resource that provides that. So we love you all with the love of the Lord. Thank you again for being here and spending this time with Minister Ryan, and we look forward to her return in the summer, and all of us helping to build this resource together. Have a wonderful, wonderful week, everyone, and feel free to come up, take pictures with Minister Ryan, get her contact, love on her. She's a member lifelong of the Way, and we love her, and we're so proud of her. God bless you all. Have a wonderful week. I'll take your mic.